Hi everybody, this is our lecture for writing effective needs statements. We talked about the needs statement being a very important part of your grant proposal, and so this lecture is going to discuss what a high quality needs statement includes. So what is a needs statement? Some grant proposals call it the need for the project, the needs statement, statement of need. Usually the word need is in there somewhere though. But it's a well-written narrative that outlines the social issues that continue to impair the community without the proposed grant funding and provides risks associated with the community-based issues such as trends and community-wide socioeconomic impacts. So you're talking about kind of the big picture, or why do we need this project at all? What is it that I want to do, and how is that associated with the needs in my community? Now, when I say community, that could be your school, it could be the larger community, it could be several different things. So let's start with the first component. The first thing that we need to have is a problem description. So you need to concisely and powerfully tell what is the problem. This is usually started with a very powerful first sentence. Now we're going to have another section of the lecture is on persuasive writing. But that very first sentence of your needs statement is so incredibly important. We want to make sure that it very clearly and powerfully says what is the problem. And just like we talked about, or you talked about when you were back in high school and we're learning about how to write, we want to answer the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Now, we don't want to go on and on and on about this, but we want to make sure that very early on in our needs statement, the reader knows who we're talking about, what we're talking about, where, when, and why this is important. So we want to use the need statement to show the reader that you really understand the problem. This isn't just describing symptoms, but what really is the heart of the issue. Then we move on to problem recognition. Why is this a problem? What negative impact does this have on my school, my students' families, whoever it is, the population that you're talking about? Is it something that just I see as a problem? Who else sees it as a problem? What do the other teachers at the school? What do the students themselves think? What do their families think? What about the community? What do the community stakeholders think about this problem? This is a good time where some grant proposals will ask you for needs assessment data, so that you go out and you do surveys or you collect information from the community about what the needs are, and you use that assessment data to then document the need for your project. Now, sometimes that's required, so of course you have to do it. Sometimes it's just suggested. Quite honestly, sometimes you don't really have time to do that level of assessment. So it's important that you kind of ongoing have a running idea of what the need is and have data to back that. Next, we're going to talk about the problem implications. What happens to the population or the community if this problem isn't resolved? What's the negative outcome? What is the negative consequence? That if we don't do something about this problem, what's going to happen or what's going to continue to happen? This is a good time to kind of put it not only in the context of your little system, your school, your classroom, but also a larger system, like a larger cost to society. So linking this to negative impact both immediately and down the road makes your needs statement much more powerful. Hurdles. What kind of hurdles do you have? What are the challenges to addressing the problem? So if this is something that was easily overcome, then you could have done it without grant funding, presumably. So you want to say, here are the challenges we're facing. This is the gap between what we have now and what ought to be. And this is where you're starting to lead the reader to, and this grant proposal will help close that gap. What things have presented resolution of the problem before? Again, what kinds of barriers do you have that are in the way? Urgency is important. Why does this have to be addressed now? Why is it important that we funnel this extra money or this extra support into this issue? What are you currently doing? show how what you're currently doing is somewhat effective, but how this additional support now would lend for a quicker resolution to the problem. What solving the problem means. Again, why should they give you money to solve this problem? Why should outside funding be used? Why isn't this something that is already being attended to within the normal scope of practice at your school, or normal, business as usual? Again, this kind of ties those gaps and those needs in the problem and the solution of grant funding to help solve that problem or reduce that gap. Now, we have to be careful to not overclaim or overpromise. We want to be very clear what can be accomplished within the time frame of the grant, not overpromising or underpromising. And we want to make sure that we talk about in the need that this is a very reasonable, achievable, and measurable outcome if we take this proposed action. Now, in this section, some of this stuff we're going to go into much more detail later. So this is just kind of giving a little overview or preview of those things. So we're going to be talking about objectives, methods, action plans, those kinds of things in later sections. But your need should kind of tie all that together and introduce that. And then finally, we want to make this interesting and compelling to the reader. Now, this is one that's a fine line because, you've all seen, and I put a little sad picture of a dog, we've all seen the commercials imploring us to donate to some animal rescue society or something that works with children in underdeveloped countries and they're starving and they need school. And those stories really tug at your heartstrings, right? So we want to, in good taste, and with good ethics, provide some real examples of how the problem is affecting someone and their life, and how, if they could participate in this program, it would have a positive impact on his or her life. Now, we want to make sure that we maintain confidentiality. So if we're describing someone that we don't have permission to share their personal story, we need to make sure that what we share is done in a way that still maintains their confidentiality, or that we have permission to share their information. But we want to make it real. Now, we're going to talk about statistics a little bit in the second recorded lecture for this week. And statistics are very important, and they can be informative and kind of jar you into to paying attention. But they can sometimes be impersonal or even overwhelming. So we want to make sure that we do include some specific examples, putting a face on the problem, and circumstances that could help yield positive results. So I also wanted to give you, in the handouts that you can print for this, you'll see that this is a whole page. These are some notes from a previous semester class that I taught. This is a little different. I think that the points that I just talked about are a little more concise and a little more focused, but this sheet that I'm also giving you just for reference also gives some good ideas. Okay, so as you know, you're going to write a draft needs statement this week. So you're going to try to incorporate the features that I talked about in this lecture. You're going to talk about and incorporate statistics that we're going to talk about in the next section of this lecture. And you're going to be very persuasive in your writing, which we're going to talk about hopefully in class, but possibly in another recorded lecture. So by doing all those three things, you're going to develop your draft needs statement. Then on Monday, you're going to be given 2 needs statements written by peers in the class. And you're going to read their needs statement and you're going to give an assessment as to how well you think they did these things. Now, this is part 1. So you're going to, on a scale of 1 to 5, you're going to rate how well does their needs statement define the problem, describe implications or importance, does it relate to their organization's mission and their funder's mission, does it show gaps, and does it back it up with personal stories, and statistics. So you're going to give it a rating of 1 to 5. Now, this isn't the only thing you're going to do. You're going to also rate it on persuasiveness, and then you're going to have to give 2 specific areas with details for improvement. But I wanted to kind of show you this section of the rubric. All right, so that's part 1, and stay tuned for part 2.